Also, I reached a point where I retired and I had time, and I thought, well, this would be an opportunity to reflect on things. And I did realize that the years that I spent at MGM were very unique.
Hollywood would be nothing without its younger stars. For over a century, the film industry has had billion-dollar franchises led by child actors who become household names. It's surprising to see these young children hold their own against established, experienced names in cinema, but that's exactly what makes their performances so memorable years down the line. The story looks a lot different behind the scenes, though. From binding contracts that destroy careers to families being torn apart because of fame and money, these young actors have had to let go of their childhoods for an industry that turned their back on them when they needed it the most. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll wasn't just another child actor. He was Disney's shining star. Walt Disney himself called the future of the studio. The first child ever signed to an exclusive Disney contract, Bobby was the voice of Peter Pan, the star of Treasure Island, and the wide-eyed talent who earned a Juvenile Academy Award before he even turned 13. He practically embodied pure childhood magic. However, as Bobby entered his teens, the transformation every child star fears began. His features sharpened, his skin broke out, and Disney executives who had once treated him like family suddenly saw him as a liability. His contract was terminated quietly in 1953, just 3 years after he'd carried one of the studio's biggest live-action hits. At only 16, Bobby found himself washed up in an industry that had no interest in helping him grow beyond the roles they had boxed him into. By his early 20s, Bobby was completely estranged from Hollywood and even from his parents. Then, in 1968, his story reached a heartbreaking end. Children playing in an abandoned East Village tenement discovered his body and buried his body when no one stepped up to claim it. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later that his identity was confirmed through fingerprint records, after his mother reported him missing. But the cruelest twist of them all, Disney failed to acknowledge his passing until years later. The boy who once taught the world that everyone must grow up eventually was forgotten by the system that created him. Margaret O'Brien. Margaret O'Brien was one of MGM's most prized child stars, celebrated for her astonishing emotional depth, especially in Meet Me in St. Louis alongside Judy Garland. She could cry on cue, command a scene with ease, and even earned a Juvenile Academy Award for her work. She was unstoppable. But as Margaret grew into her teens, Hollywood's interest faded. Rather than chase shrinking opportunities or accept roles beneath her talent, she made a rare, confident choice for a former child star. She chose to step away. Margaret pursued school, family, and a quieter life, returning only occasionally for stage and TV work. Unlike so many child actors, she didn't crumble under pressure or fall victim to mismanagement. She preserved her sense of self and her dignity. Claude Jarman Jr. Claude Jarman Jr. stunned audiences with his breakthrough performance in The Yearling, earning a Juvenile Academy Award for a role critics still consider one of the most natural child performances ever captured on film, and you'd have to be a fool to disagree. The world actually expected him to become a lifelong leading man. But Claude had a different plan. As his roles became fewer and less meaningful, he recognized something most young actors don't. Fame is fleeting, but education lasts. Instead of clinging to a fading career, he stepped away, returning to Tennessee to finish high school like a normal teenager. He later attended Vanderbilt University, served in the Navy, and eventually found his calling outside the spotlight. Claude spent 15 years shaping film culture as the executive director of the San Francisco International Film Festival and proved that his love for cinema didn't depend on being in front of a camera. He passed away peacefully in his home in January 2025 and cemented his legacy as a Hollywood icon who didn't let fame define his life. Deanna Durbin. Deanna Durbin practically defined the film industry in the late 1930s. Her radiant soprano voice and wholesome charm helped lift Universal Studios out of bankruptcy with projects like Three Smart Girls and 100 Men and a Girl. By her early 20s, she was one of the highest-paid women in America. Millions adored her. Every studio wanted her because she was considered Hollywood's lucky charm. However, she chose to walk away from everything at the height of her career. Durbin shocked Hollywood when she retired at just 27 years old and turned down lucrative contracts. No one pushed her out. In fact, they wanted to keep her around for as long as possible. But she decided to vanish from public life entirely. Deanna later revealed that the industry's constant pressure to maintain a perfect girl-next-door persona left her feeling suffocated. Fame had given her everything, except happiness. So she left for France, married, raised a family, and refused all interview requests for the next 6 decades so she could gradually fade out of the spotlight. Until her passing in 2013, Deanna Durbin remained Hollywood's greatest mystery, but turns out that all she wanted was some normalcy. Brandon DeWilde. Brandon DeWilde took over Hollywood with a single line in the 1953 film, Shane. The young actor delivered, "Shane, come back," with heartbreaking authenticity, and that earned him an Academy Award nomination at just 11 years old, making him one of the youngest nominees in film history. But Brandon wasn't a child star who faded as he grew. He actually broke the pattern. How? He successfully transitioned into teenage and young adult roles, shining in films like HUD alongside Paul Newman and building a reputation as one of the most naturally gifted actors of his generation. Critics believed he was on the verge of an extraordinary adult career, that he had finally broken the curse that follows most child stars. Then, a different kind of tragedy struck. In 1972, while driving near Denver, Brandon lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a flatbed truck. He died from his injuries at only 30 years old. A life cut short, just as his true potential was beginning to unfold. Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple wasn't just a successful child actor. She had the kind of cultural impact that even seasoned performers strive for. With her curly hair, tap dancing, and trademark dimples, she was the world's biggest movie star at the age of 7. But even she couldn't fight against Hollywood's harshest reality. Children grow up. By 12, her box office magic had started to fade. Shirley tried to transition into more mature roles and grow her career in a new direction. But studios kept dropping her like it was no big deal. After a few unsuccessful attempts at teenage roles, Shirley quietly left film acting at 22. But her story didn't end there. Shirley is one of the very few child stars who went through a major reinvention. She became Shirley Temple Black, a respected diplomat, U.S. ambassador, and UN delegate. She used her fame for the greater good and navigated global politics with the same charm and poise she once brought to the screen. Tommy Rettig. Tommy Rettig is known for playing the lovable, wholesome farm boy, Jeff Miller, alongside television's most beloved collie on Lassie. The young actor was a fan favorite in millions of American households back in the 1950s and had a natural charm that turned him into one of the era's most recognizable child stars. However, That's exactly what led to his downfall. Behind all the fame and nostalgia, Tommy started feeling trapped. At the age of 14, he was overwhelmed by the pressures of the industry and started yearning for a normal life. At his age, he chose to make a bold request, one that many would go on to question for years and years. He asked to be released from his contract right at the peak of his career. The producers were shocked and fans were heartbroken. But for Tommy, the decision was as clear as day. Unfortunately, post-Lassie, he didn't really get the kind of roles that he had hoped for. He was typecast, and his career slowly dried up. A few legal troubles and failed career revivals pushed him further from the industry he once helped define. Then came a surprising second act. Tommy reinvented himself completely, becoming a respected database programming pioneer long before Silicon Valley exploded. He passed away in 1996 after building a successful career in tech, and that's what you call a full 180. Baby Peggy. Before Shirley Temple, there was Baby Peggy, a tiny silent-era superstar who made more than 150 films before the age of 6. While that might have felt like a great achievement back in the day, it's only now that people realize how exploitative it must have been. Baby Peggy became one of Hollywood's first global child icons, earning the modern equivalent of over $20 million a year. She had fame, fortune, and fans around the world. But none of it actually belonged to her. Her father, who controlled every aspect of her life, mismanaged her earnings and pushed her through grueling workdays with no real childhood. When a studio dispute ended her career at age 7, the family's wealth vanished almost overnight. As she grew older, Baby Peggy became a painful reminder of an exploited past she wanted to escape. She changed her name to Diana Sarah Carey, rebuilt her life through ordinary jobs, and eventually became a respected author and historian. By the time she passed away at 101, she had reclaimed her story, transforming from a forgotten child star into the voice for countless others who never got to grow up on their own terms. Scotty Beckett. Scotty Beckett was one of the brightest stars of the Our Gang comedies, with his signature newsboy cap and mischievous grin. Audiences adored him, and for a while, it looked like he might pull off the rare transition from child actor to successful adult star. He even landed roles playing the younger versions of screen legends like Spencer Tracy and Frederick March. But behind the scenes, Scotty's life began unraveling early. The sudden death of his father when he was just 14 devastated him, and he spent the rest of his life trying to fill the emotional void it left behind. Illegal substances and a string of arrests pushed him further and further from Hollywood's good graces. By the late 1950s, he was unemployable and in a constant downward spiral. In 1968, after a mysterious beating, Scotty was found dead in a nursing home at just 38 years old. His life, once filled with promise, became one of Hollywood's most tragic cautionary tales. Freddie Bartholomew. Freddie Bartholomew blew the world away with his incredible performances in David Copperfield, Little Lord Fauntleroy, and Captains Courageous. It's safe to say that he was one of the most respected child actors of the 1930s, thanks to his refined British charm. But his home life was anything but proper. Freddie's sudden fame ignited a vicious custody battle. His biological parents, who had shown little interest in him before Hollywood, which led to his aunt raising him, resurfaced and demanded control. Now, this wasn't out of love, but for access to his earnings. Years of court fights drained most of his fortune, and obviously, All of this was tough for him to deal with as a child. As he entered adolescence, roles faded, and MGM eventually released him from his contract. But Freddie didn't spiral like so many others. Instead, he reinvented himself behind the scenes, eventually becoming a successful television advertising executive in New York. He left his days in the spotlight far behind, though, given everything that he had been through, and you can't really blame him. Jackie Coogan. Jackie Coogan practically defined stardom in the silent era. Charlie Chaplin discovered him at age 7 and cast him in The Kid, where Jackie delivered one of the most heartbreaking performances Hollywood had ever seen. His expressive face made him an international icon. Toys, merchandise, clothing, food products. He was everywhere, and that's everything a child actor can ever want. But while Jackie was earning millions, he didn't get to enjoy any of it. When he turned 21 and finally expected access to his fortune, he learned the truth. His mother and stepfather had spent nearly all of it on luxury cars, jewels, and lavish living. Jackie sued them and won, but only recovered a fraction of what he'd earned. However, his case led to something far more important. The Coogan Law still protects child actors' earnings today. Though he found adult fame again as Uncle Fester in The Addams Family, his true legacy lives in the impact he created for other child stars as a result of his suffering. And that takes guts. Beverly Washburn. Beverly Washburn may not be the most famous name on this list, but in the 1950s, she was one of Hollywood's most reliable and emotionally expressive young performers. With her big, soulful eyes and natural sincerity, she delivered memorable roles in classics like Shane, Old Yeller, and dozens of television series. Directors loved her because she could cry on cue and bring genuine vulnerability to every scene. But Beverly's path took a gentler turn than many of her peers. As she grew older, she wasn't pushed out or swept up in scandal. The roles simply slowed down, and she gracefully accepted the shift. Instead of clinging to the spotlight, she chose a balanced life outside the pressures of Hollywood. She occasionally returned for small roles and fan conventions, but she built her adulthood on stability rather than fame. Kudos to her for that. Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman was the face of 1980s television. He played Arnold Jackson on Different Strokes, and his catchphrase, "What you talking about, Willis?" remains a cultural phenomenon. But while America adored him, Gary was fighting battles no child should ever face. A lifelong kidney condition stunted his growth and kept him in and out of hospitals. Worse, he discovered that the millions he earned had been mismanaged and siphoned away, not by strangers, but by the adults he trusted most. After suing his parents and business manager, Gary found himself nearly broke, typecast, and shunned from the roles he once dominated. His later years were marked by financial hardship, public struggles, and declining health. When he died at just 42, it was a heartbreaking reminder of how damaging childhood fame can really be. Macaulay Culkin. In the early 90s, Macaulay Culkin practically redefined what a child actor could really do and their impact. His role as Kevin McAllister in Home Alone made him the most iconic young performer of his generation and, for a time, the highest-paid kid in Hollywood history. But behind his mischievous charm lay a childhood overshadowed by grueling schedules and an increasingly toxic family environment. By age 15, Macaulay walked away, not because he couldn't land roles, but because he wanted a life that wasn't controlled by studios, managers, or the courts. For nearly a decade, he vanished from Hollywood, living quietly and focusing on reclaiming his identity outside the spotlight. Tabloids painted him as troubled, publishing all kinds of rumors. But the truth was far simpler. Macaulay Culkin just wanted to live a normal life. Today, he works selectively, enjoys fatherhood, and has re-emerged as a belovedly nostalgic pop culture figure, this time on his own terms. Mara Wilson. To everyone who grew up in the 90s, Mara Wilson will always be Matilda, the brilliant, kind girl who made magic feel as real as breathing. That's not all, though, because she also charmed audiences in Mrs. Doubtfire and Miracle on 34th Street, becoming the era's go-to child actress for heartfelt, grounded performances. But as Hollywood continued to commodify her childhood, Mara began to see the industry for how unforgiving and often unkind to young girls who didn't fit its narrow beauty standards. Not just that, but behind her success, Mara was dealing with something far beyond her control. During the filming of Matilda, her mother was battling cancer. Director Danny DeVito and his wife, Rhea Perlman, became almost second parents during the shoot, shielding her from the chaos and making sure she always felt safe on set. DeVito even showed her mother an early cut of the film before she passed. Something Mara has said meant the world to her. After losing her mum, acting no longer held the same joy. Hollywood's harsh expectations only widened the gap. As an adult, Mara stepped away, becoming a writer and mental health advocate to help other kids navigate the pressures of fame better than she did. In leaving Hollywood, she truly found herself. Haley Joel Osment. Haley Joel Osment delivered a completely unexpected yet spectacular performance in The Sixth Sense at the age of just 11 years old. The pure conviction with which he delivered the line, "I see dead people," was enough to cement him as one of Hollywood's most gifted young actors. But early success comes with a price. As Haley entered his teens, casting directors struggled to see past the wide-eyed child star he once was. Instead of forcing his way through a system that didn't know where to place him, he stepped back, went to college, and allowed himself to grow up out of the public eye. Years later, he returned, not as a former child sensation trying to revive old fame, but as a versatile character actor working steadily in television, indie films, and voice acting. Haley adapted to fame on his own timeline, and that's rare to see. Jay North. Jay North's face was everywhere in the early 1960s, thanks to his role as the mischievous, lovable troublemaker in Dennis the Menace. He was the ideal TV kid, funny, energetic, and instantly recognizable. But behind the cheerful persona, Jay was living a nightmare. While filming, he endured harsh treatment from his on-set guardians, his aunt and uncle, who monitored and pressured him relentlessly and punished him if they felt his performance wasn't perfect. The emotional toll was severe, and by the time Jay aged out of the role at 12, he was deeply scarred. Typecasting made it nearly impossible for him to transition to teen roles, and he eventually left Hollywood entirely. Jay later joined the Navy and built a quiet life far from the spotlight. As an adult, he began speaking openly about the mistreatment he faced, helping reform on-set protections for young performers. And that's what you call using your platform for good. Johnny Crawford. Johnny Crawford became a household name as Mark McCain, the sensitive young son in The Rifleman. With his expressive eyes and honest performances, he built one of the most beloved father-son dynamics in TV history. But fame came fast and ended just as quickly. After the show wrapped, Hollywood struggled to see him as anything other than the sweet child he once played. which is the case with most child stars. Roles dried up, and Johnny quietly slipped out of the spotlight, pivoting instead to his love of music. He found a second life, performing vintage American standards, fronting a popular orchestra for decades. But his later years were deeply heartbreaking. Crawford battled Alzheimer's disease, and his health declined rapidly. Fans rallied to support him, raising funds to cover his care, which goes to show the impact he had on the world. He passed away in 2021, remembered not for scandal or controversy, but for genuine talent, humility, and a lifetime spent bringing warmth to every project he touched. Benita Granville. Benita Granville earned an Academy Award nomination at just 13 for playing one of the most devious children ever put on film, Mary Tilford, in These Three. She later became the silver screen's original Nancy Drew, a teenage detective with sharp wit and undeniable charisma. But as she entered adulthood, the roles became smaller, the offers fewer, and Benita chose not to fight the current. Instead, she staged one of Hollywood's most impressive reinventions. Benita married producer Jack Rather and transitioned into the business side of entertainment, eventually becoming co-owner and executive producer of the wildly successful Lassie television empire. She didn't fade away. She strategically stepped into a different role. When she passed in 1988, she had made one of the most successful career pivots Hollywood has ever seen. Amanda Bynes. Amanda Bynes wasn't just a successful child star, she was the comedic prodigy of the late 90s and early 2000s. Everyone knew she was destined for success like no other. Bursting onto the scene in All That, and later, The Amanda Show, she had impeccable timing, a rare mix of innocence and sharp humor, and the kind of charisma that made producers call her the female Jim Carrey. By her teens, she had already conquered television and moved into movies like What a Girl Wants, Hairspray, and Easy A. Amanda seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, the pressure of fame, non-stop work, and public scrutiny began weighing heavily on her. As she transitioned into adulthood, Amanda struggled with identity, burnout, and mental health challenges worsened by the constant spotlight. Her public spiral, controversial tweets, erratic behavior, and a court-ordered conservatorship became tabloid fodder. So Amanda stepped away from Hollywood to save herself. Today, she continues to focus on recovery, privacy, and building a life far removed from the chaos that once took over her. These children have been through tumultuous journeys, and while some have managed to leave the past behind, some couldn't outrun it, even if they tried. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.